The night always settled over the highway in a way that felt heavy, as if the darkness carried a shape of its own. I remember stepping out of the station and feeling the cold push against my face. It was the kind of cold that did not sting. It lingered. It pressed. It reminded me that the land around us had no interest in keeping anyone warm or alive. Out here, we were guests, temporary ones. I unlocked my cruiser and slid into the seat. The leather felt stiff from the temperature drop. The engine started with a low rumble that vibrated through my hands. I sat there for a moment with the headlights cutting a narrow path across the lot. The rest of the world stayed swallowed by dark emptiness. Nights like this always made me feel smaller than I should have, smaller than a human being should ever feel. My shift log blinked on the dashboard. Routine patrol, northern route, 42 miles of open nothing before the next junction. I tried to shake off the sinking feeling in my stomach. Night patrol had never bothered me during training. They taught us how to handle drunks, collisions, wildlife, stranded tourists, all predictable, all familiar. But no one prepared me for the silence of the remote highway, silence that carried intention. The moment I pulled onto the asphalt, the wind changed direction. It blew across the hood and slid through the cracks around the windows in a long, steady breath. My fingers tightened around the wheel. I kept telling myself it was only the start of another shift, nothing more. The horizon glowed faintly behind me as the last traces of daylight faded. Ahead of me, the road vanished into layers of dark. Occasional lights flickered far away, isolated houses or farms that did not want to be found. I kept the cruiser at a steady speed and tried to focus on anything other than the weight in my chest. My radio crackled, sharp at first, then faint. A thin thread of static drifted across the channel. It almost sounded rhythmic, like something trying to pulse into a pattern. I leaned closer and tapped the side of the receiver. The noise softened, then returned stronger. My name almost formed inside it, but I shook the thought off before it could settle. The department always repeated the same lesson. Do not give meaning to things that do not follow logical order. Remote signals bounce, wind interferes, temperature affects the towers. There is no intention in static, only noise. I repeated that to myself like a prayer. The road stretched under me in a straight, unbroken line. The markings were faded from years of weather. The shoulder dipped into open desert on both sides. Sparse bushes bent under the push of the wind. Their shadows trembled under my lights in a way that looked too human. I slowed my breathing and kept driving. Most nights I settled into a rhythm by now. Tonight refused to let me reach it. Something followed just outside the range of the headlights. I could not see it, but I felt it move in the shape of the dark. The land had always been empty, but never quiet. Tonight it felt awake in a way that pressed against my ribs. I rolled the window down a crack. Cold air flooded in. It smelled like dust and old iron, a scent that reminded me of abandoned scrapyards where metal rusted into strange shapes. I pulled the window back up and rubbed the warmth into my hands. The more the night settled, the more the highway revealed the truth I had always known but never said aloud. We were not meant to be this isolated. Humans need noise, movement, signs of life. Out here, every breath felt borrowed. Another surge of static crawled through the radio. This time it carried a faint rise and fall. Not words, yet close enough to trigger nerves behind my ears. I reached for the transmitter. Dispatch, this is Unit 12. Are there any known outages tonight? Only more static answered. No voice, no correction, just that slow crawling noise that pressed into my skull. I hung the microphone back in place and swallowed hard. The department warned new recruits about this stretch of highway, not with official briefings. They did it quietly, off the record. They warned us that isolation plays tricks on the senses. They said the mind fills empty space with whatever shape fits its fears. They said if the road felt like it was watching us, we should ignore it. Nothing waits out here. Nothing thinks out here. I believed that once. I tried to believe it now. The landscape shifted again as I approached mile marker 30. The wind died so suddenly it felt like someone silenced it. The sky thickened into an oppressive black. My headlights hit the pavement and faded quickly, swallowed before they reached 100 yards. It felt like driving into a throat. I rubbed the back of my neck. My skin felt colder there, as if something hovered just behind me. I checked the rearview mirror. Only darkness stared back, but I could not shake the sensation of being observed. Not by a person, by the land itself. The isolation sharpened every sound inside the cruiser. My breathing, the hum of the engine, the faint rattle of loose equipment in the back. Every noise felt like it carried a second layer, as if something underneath it tried to match me breath for breath. My pulse quickened. I tried to loosen my grip on the wheel, but my hands refused. I reminded myself that dread has no logic. It arrives like a shift in weather. It surrounds you before you notice it. Yet tonight it carried weight, a deliberate weight that pushed against my thoughts. My headlights washed across a reflective sign ahead. Slow down, patrol check station in 5 miles. Except there was no check station on this route anymore. It had been closed for 4 years, torn down. Even the foundation had been removed. Yet the sign stood fresh. No rust, no damage, as if it had been placed there recently. A cold shiver crawled up my spine. I slowed to match the message, even though I knew no one else was out here. The radio crackled again. This time the static rose and fell in a way that mimicked breathing. My breathing. I shut it off. For the first time in months, I felt truly alone in the worst possible way. The kind of alone where you understand something ancient shares the road with you, something that waits for the right moment to make itself known. The highway stretched endlessly ahead. My cruiser felt smaller. My thoughts felt tighter. The rules I had learned returned to me slowly, not the ones printed on paper, the unspoken ones, the ones older officers whispered about. Never assume an empty road is truly empty. Never assume silence means safety. Never assume the dark is not listening. I kept driving, but my chest grew heavier with every mile. The night felt aware of me. The land felt aware of me. And somewhere in that awareness, something waited for a person who traveled alone long enough to hear it. I did not know it yet, but this was the night I finally did. The rules were the first thing they handed me when I joined the highway patrol. Not a weapon, not a handbook, a laminated sheet the size of a postcard, printed in plain black text. I remember flipping it over during my first briefing, expecting reminders about seatbelts and traffic stops. Instead, I found guidelines that felt more like folklore than policy. Rule 3 stood out the moment I read it. If a car moves with no visible driver, do not approach from the front. Do not shout. Do not signal. Do not speak until you confirm the car is empty. I laughed when I first saw it. Everyone did. The older officers never laughed back. They only nodded quietly and said we would understand with time. I brushed it off as superstition built into the culture of rural patrols. Every department had strange stories. Every region had warnings older than the pavement. But now, as I drove deeper into the dark stretch of highway, the memory of those words pressed into the sides of my mind with a slow, tightening grip. I could not pretend they were just superstition anymore. Something about the empty land reminded me that rules like that often come from events no one wants to talk about. The radio stayed silent after that last burst of static. The silence felt intentional. It made the cab of the cruiser feel too narrow, as if the dark outside pushed against the windows, trying to squeeze its way in. My pulse settled into an uneasy rhythm. My breathing sounded louder than the engine. I tried to distract myself by thinking back to my training days. The older officers always avoided questions about the driverless car rule. They never explained where it came from. They never described what had happened on this highway before we arrived. They simply said it existed for a reason, and that reason was not up for discussion. During night simulations, they made us rehearse the procedure. Approach from the rear. Keep distance. Avoid speaking until the interior is confirmed empty. They monitored our eyes to make sure we did not look straight through the windshield until the right moment. They acted like we were preparing for something sensitive, something that could be triggered. I remembered asking Officer Lee why silence mattered. His answer still made no sense. He said sound gives shape to things that should stay shapeless. Back then I rolled my eyes. Now the thought made my chest tighten. The wind picked up again. It carried a colder edge this time. It rattled the frame of the cruiser with a low vibration that reminded me of distant footsteps. I checked my mirrors every few seconds, not because I expected a car, but because the dark behind me gained weight. It felt like something stretched through it, reaching across the asphalt. Not close enough to see, close enough to sense. I glanced at the laminated rules again. I kept a copy tucked into the visor out of habit. The card slid halfway out when I hit a dip in the road. I caught it between my fingers before it fell. The paper felt warmer than it should have, as if it had been in someone else's hand long before I touched it. The list was simple. Short rules. Clear wording. Everything about them felt practical at first glance. Except rules standing alone usually meant they were taken from incidents no one wanted to document. Procedures born out of mistakes. Mistakes often tied to death. I drove slower as the air grew thicker. My headlights failed to cut through the dark as sharply as before. The beams dimmed at the edges, swallowed by what looked like dust but felt heavier, almost like moisture that carried weight. The sky held no stars. The moon was hidden behind a sheet of cloud. The radio crackled again just for a moment. A short burst of noise, followed by a silence that rang in my ears. I reached for the transmitter, but something made me stop. The silence felt loaded. Listening to it made me feel like someone else was listening back. The rules repeated in my mind. Do not signal. Do not shout. Do not speak until you confirm the car is empty. The phrasing had always bothered me. Why caution against speaking? Why would sound matter? Why would a moving car without a driver respond to a voice? The rules implied that the car was not deserted. It implied something or someone inside it responded to human attention. I kept one hand on the wheel and one on my knee, trying to settle the tremor running through my fingers. I reminded myself that fear does not equal danger, but fear becomes a warning when the environment changes in ways the mind cannot explain. Up ahead, the road dipped slightly, and the reflective sign for mile marker 36 came into view. Its surface caught my headlights and shone brighter than usual, as if polished recently. I passed it slowly. A cold pressure pressed into my chest as I did. Beyond that point, the rules were not just suggestions. They were survival habits. I thought back to my first month on the job. One of the rookies quit after his second night shift. He claimed he saw a station wagon drift across the road with no one holding the wheel. When he approached it too quickly, the radio inside the car turned on by itself and began replaying his own voice from the past hour. He said the car had been waiting for him. I dismissed the story then. I called him dramatic. Now I wondered if he had been the only honest one among us. The highway narrowed as I continued north. The shoulder dropped sharply into dark brush. The trees thinned out until the land turned into a wide open field of gnarled, low shrubs. They looked like broken limbs, their silhouettes twisted under the changing wind. My headlights cast long shadows that reached across the road like fingers trying to catch the cruiser. Rule 3 pulsed in my mind again. If a car moves with no visible driver, do not approach from the front. Not for your safety, not for the car, but because something might mistake your voice for an invitation. I adjusted my grip on the wheel and forced my breathing to slow. I did not want to think about the possibility that something on this route responded to sound, to attention, or to the simple act of recognizing its presence. The highway was empty tonight, too empty. The absence of other cars felt unnatural. Usually at least one truck passed in the first hour, a rancher, a long-haul driver, a tourist who missed the daytime exit, but tonight there was nothing. No lights in the distance, no engines, no signs of human travel. Only me. Only the dark. Only the rules that suddenly felt like they were written for this exact moment. My radio clicked softly, not static, not a transmission, just a click like someone tapping the microphone from the other side. I stared at it in silence. My throat tightened. A cold film spread across my skin. Something old lived out here. Something that watched the road long before headlamps ever cut through its night. Something that learned the shape of sound and the weight of fear. And it waited for those who traveled alone long enough to hear it. Tonight, I feared I had finally crossed into its territory. Mile marker 91 had always felt like the point where the highway changed its nature. The air grew thinner there. The land stretched wider. The ground dipped in a way that made the horizon seem farther than it should be. Even on calm nights, it felt like stepping into a pocket carved out by something older than the pavement. As I approached it, the unease I had been holding back rose slowly through my ribs. The wind carried a colder edge. It slid across the hood of the cruiser and curled under the frame like a warning. My headlights swept over the reflective surface of the mile marker sign. For an instant, the metal shimmered as if something stood between the beams and the post. My hands tightened involuntarily around the wheel. Then I saw the sedan. A silver shape drifting across the lanes with a slow, deliberate glide. It did not weave or jerk the way a distracted driver would. It moved with control, yet without awareness, as if guided by an instinct that did not come from a human being. I eased off the accelerator. My heartbeat rose quickly. The brake lights of the sedan pulsed in a rhythm that almost resembled breath. Slow, steady, measured, not the mechanical flicker of a failing system. The glow expanded and shrank as if the car exhaled into the darkness. I whispered to myself, "Just stay calm," but the words did not help. The laminated rules pushed through my memory with a sudden sting. If a car moves with no visible driver, do not approach from the front. Do not signal. Do not speak until you confirm the car is empty. I kept my cruiser at a distance, trailing the sedan by 30 yards. The beam from my headlights stretched across its trunk, revealing spotless metal and a faint drift of dust dancing above the surface. No movement inside. No silhouette in the window. No sign of hands on the wheel. Yet it continued forward at an even pace, following the lane markings as though it had memorized them. My breath began to tighten. I lowered the speed another notch. I reached for the radio but stopped halfway. I did not trust my voice. I did not trust the silence waiting inside it. The memory of earlier static gnawed at the back of my mind. If something listened through those channels, I did not want to announce that I had seen something I should not have seen. The sedan began to slow. Not abruptly, not with hesitation. It slowed in a smooth, unnatural glide. The brake lights expanded again, glowing brighter with each pulse. It stayed perfectly centered between the lanes, not even an inch of drift. My skin crawled. I forced myself to breathe through my nose and focus on training. Stay behind it. Do not rush. Do not let curiosity override caution. The car rolled to a perfect stop on the shoulder, not a tire out of place, not a sound from the suspension. The engine idled quietly, rhythmic and steady, too steady. I brought my cruiser to a halt 20 feet behind it. My headlights washed over the rear of the sedan, illuminating the silver paint and scattering dust in the air. The stillness that followed pressed into my ears. It felt like the world around me had paused. I stared through the windshield at the empty driver's seat. There was no mistake, no shadow, no movement, no person. The seatbelt hung untouched against the pillar. The wheel sat perfectly centered. Yet I could not shake the feeling that something had been sitting there second before I arrived. A heavy chill crept across my shoulders. It settled into the base of my neck, spreading slowly. The air inside the cruiser felt colder than outside. My fingers buzzed with a faint tremor. My mouth went dry. I reached for the door handle and stopped again. My mind raced through the rules. Approach from the rear. Keep your distance. Do not speak unless you know it is empty. My pulse hammered so loudly it felt like it pushed against the inside of my throat. I checked my mirrors. Empty road behind me. Empty land on both sides. No headlights approaching. No engines humming in the distance. Just me and a sedan that moved without a driver. I opened the door and stepped into the night. The cold hit harder than I expected. It wrapped around my legs and slid up my spine. The ground felt firm, yet somehow colder than the air, as if heat had been drained out of it recently. I closed the door gently, unwilling to make any sound louder than necessary. My boots pressed into the dirt with soft, steady crunches. Each step felt intrusive, as if the land was not meant to be walked on in that moment. I kept my flashlight off. The headlights of the cruiser gave me enough light, and I did not want to offer anything more than I had to. As I moved closer, a strange pressure tightened over my chest. Not painful, not suffocating, more like standing too close to a charged power line. The hairs on my arms lifted. A faint hum reached my ears, low and steady. It seemed to come from the sedan. I stopped behind the rear bumper and watched for movement inside. Nothing shifted. No shape formed. No breath fogged the windows, yet I sensed warmth near the vehicle. Real warmth, as if someone had stepped out seconds before and the air had not caught up yet. My voice pushed against my throat, begging for release, for a call to dispatch or a warning or anything that felt human. But I remembered the rules. I kept silent. I moved slowly toward the rear passenger side, angling myself to see more of the interior. The windows were tinted lightly, but not enough to hide what was inside. The dashboard glowed faintly. The radio screen flickered once, then dimmed again. Still no driver. Still no sign of life. I placed my hand on the roof of the sedan. The metal was warm. Not from the engine, not from sunlight. Warm like the heat of a living body, warm like skin. My breath hitched in my throat. Something had been breathing inside that car. Seconds ago. I stepped back instinctively, my heart slamming hard against my ribs. The air around me shifted. A cold breeze pushed past my legs, gliding under the car and rising behind me. It carried a faint sound, a soft, irregular rhythm that faded as quickly as it came. I froze. The highway felt aware of me. The land felt aware of me. And the sedan felt like an object no longer empty. It felt occupied by something that did not need a seatbelt, or a posture, or a human shape. I swallowed hard and forced myself to continue the procedure. I had to confirm whether the interior was truly empty. That was the rule. If I broke it, I would not only violate protocol but risk making myself heard by something that listened too closely. I leaned toward the window, bracing my palm against the cold glass. Inside, the driver's seat remained empty, the wheel unmoved, the dashboard silent. But the warmth on the roof had not faded. And when I exhaled, I felt the air behind me shift in perfect time with my breath. Something on that road was breathing with me. I forced myself to step back from the sedan, my boots grinding softly against the gravel. The warmth on the roof lingered on my palm long after I lowered my hand. It felt like touching the surface of an object that had held a living body. The air around me grew so cold it pushed into my lungs with each breath. Everything inside me screamed that this was not the kind of scene anyone could handle alone. I reached for my radio. My fingers trembled so hard I almost dropped it. I pressed the button. Dispatch Unit 12. I have a vehicle stopped at mile marker 91. Driver unknown, requesting backup. I waited. Silence. A long, unnatural silence that stretched until it felt deliberate. Then the speaker cracked sharply. A burst of static spilled through, breaking apart into fragments of noise. The first layer sounded like wind, the second like whispering underwater, the third carried something else, something shaped. A faint voice threaded itself between the bursts, quiet but unmistakable. It said my name. Perfectly. Each syllable came through with clarity, but the tone was wrong. It did not sound recorded. It did not sound human. It carried no breath, no cadence, no hesitation. The name was shaped as if spoken by someone learning how to form sound for the first time. Unit 12, repeat. Do you copy? The dispatcher's voice finally cut through, strained, as if pushed aside by something occupying the same channel. She sounded distant, muffled by interference. I stepped back until the cruiser headlights caught my shoulder. Dispatch, did you say my name? More static, more interference. A shifting noise moved across the signal like something dragging through sand. Then the same whisper returned. Closer. More confident. It shaped my name again with perfect imitation, but without rhythm, like an echo trying to become a voice. A cold pressure slid across my spine. The air behind me felt heavier, dense enough to sense movement without sound. The dark on the highway had changed. It pressed against the edge of the headlights in a slow, inward creep. My pulse hammered so hard it shook my chest. I turned halfway, unable to stop myself. The stretch of road behind me was empty, but the emptiness no longer felt natural. It felt occupied, as if something had stepped into the open space and was now choosing not to be seen. Shifting weight pressed into the ground, soft, deliberate, not the wind, not the car, something else. I raised the radio again, voice unsteady. Dispatch, I need confirmation. Is anyone else transmitting on this channel? The reply arrived in a broken pattern, chopped apart by interference. Only you, only you, only you. My skin crawled. The voice repeated itself without emotion, as if the words were copied and replayed without understanding. I lowered the radio slowly. Behind me, the air thickened again. The cold seemed to breathe. I felt a presence approach, not through sound, but through pressure, the way a hand gets close to your skin before it touches you. Every nerve in my body pulled tight. My heart slammed against my ribs so violently it felt like it might break free. I forced myself to step back toward the cruiser. Every movement felt slow, as if my muscles resisted the idea of turning away from the sedan or the thing behind me. The headlights felt like the only safe territory. The dark outside their reach looked alive. I kept my eyes forward, afraid that turning around fully would give shape to whatever followed me. The sedan stayed completely still. No shake, no shift, no movement inside. Yet everything in my mind screamed that it was not empty. That something had been inside it. Something that had stepped out. Something that now stood behind me, studying the shape of my body the same way it had studied the interior of the car. I reached the driver door of my cruiser. My hand hovered over the handle. The temperature had dropped enough that frost formed along the edges of the window. My breath fogged instantly, rising in tight bursts that did not match the calm air. The radio crackled again. This time, the whisper did not hide inside the static. It shaped itself with intention. I heard my name spoken in my exact voice. Same pitch, same tone, same packing. But the breath behind it was wrong, too steady, too controlled, as if it came from a place that did not require lungs. A cold shock rolled through my chest. My vision tightened. I turned my head slightly, just enough to check the road behind me. Nothing moved, but the air along the asphalt seemed to bend. A subtle distortion, as if heat rose from the ground, except the night was freezing. The warped air stretched upward in thin columns, like the beginning of a figure trying to form itself out of temperature alone. My throat closed. I forced air in slowly. The whisper returned one more time. Not from the radio. Not from behind me. It came from inside the sedan. Clear, soft, certain. It said my name again. This time it pronounced it with understanding. This was not an abandoned vehicle. This was a tool, a shell. Something used it to learn, to practice, to mimic. And after hearing my voice over the radio, it was learning the shape of me. From the inside out. I gripped the door handle and pulled myself into the cruiser as fast as I could without running. The moment the door shut, the distortion behind me collapsed into stillness. The pressure on my spine eased, but the terror stayed. Whatever had stepped out of that sedan had not left. It was waiting for my next move. I stayed inside the cruiser with both hands locked around the steering wheel. My breath came in uneven waves, fogging the inside of the windshield until the glass blurred into a pale sheet. The sedan sat motionless in my headlights. Quiet, innocent, a simple machine on the surface. Yet everything inside me pulsed with the knowledge that something had occupied it minutes ago, something that had stepped out and remained close. I forced myself to breathe slow enough to steady my vision. Fear makes the world vibrate. It bends outlines and reshapes shadows. I tried to separate imagination from threat, but the cold in the air told me the threat was real. It had weight. It had presence. It had intention. I reached for the radio again. I debated calling in a code black, but protocol required confirmation of danger. I had no confirmation, only a sensation pressing against my instincts. I swallowed and pushed the door open. The cold hit me like a wall, hard enough to sting my skin, even though my jacket should have been enough to protect me. I stepped out, boots landing on the gravel with a crunch that echoed louder than before. The quiet had grown so complete that even small sounds felt out of place. My headlights illuminated the sedan from behind. The rear window reflected the light back at me with a faint, milky shimmer, as if the glass had been breathed on from the inside. I moved forward again, following procedure with rigid focus. Approach from the rear. Confirm the interior is empty. Do not speak. Do not break the silence unless absolutely necessary. But as I approached, something new pulled at my senses. A faint scent drifted from the open crack of the passenger window, metallic, sharp, and slightly sweet. I recognized it from accident scenes, the smell of blood drying in cold air. I reached the driver's side and looked through the window. The seat was empty, the wheel untouched, everything exactly as before. Except I could feel warmth radiating from inside the cabin. It was subtle but unmistakable, like stepping near a running engine after the power had just been cut. I leaned closer, bracing my hand on the glass. The window was warm. My chest tightened, my stomach dropped. Warmth meant life. Warmth meant presence. Warmth meant someone or something had occupied that seat very recently. I circled to the open passenger side door. It had remained slightly ajar since I first approached, as if waiting for me to look inside. My flashlight beam cut across the interior. No blood, no belongings, no signs of struggle, only the lingering heat of a body that should have been there. On the passenger seat, I saw it. A folded piece of paper, placed neatly, intentionally, waiting. My breath stopped for a moment. I reached forward with a shaking hand and picked it up. The paper felt warm, almost humid, as if held in someone's palm for a long time before being left behind. I unfolded it slowly. My name was written on the center of the page. 3 short letters, plain handwriting, no signature, no explanation. My own handwriting. A shock ran through me so abruptly that I stumbled back a step. My fingers went numb. The cold around me thickened again, settling like a weight across my shoulders. The headlights of my cruiser flickered once. The wind died. The night fell into a heavy stillness, as if the highway waited for me to react. I turned the paper over. Blank. No message, no coordinates, no warning. Just my name, written in the exact slant and spacing of the notes I left for myself on shift logs. My hands shook so badly I had to grip the edge of the car to steady myself. This could not be a coincidence. No one else had access to my handwriting. No one else knew I would be on this exact mile at this exact time. Something inside that car had been watching me long before I arrived. I placed the note back on the seat. I did not want to bring it with me. The warmth on the cushion spread faintly into the air again. The seat felt lived in, recently lived in, as if someone had been sitting there moments before heat left the space. I whispered under my breath, not intentionally, more like a reflex escaping through fear. "What were you?" The moment sound left my mouth, the air behind me shifted, a small pressure change, light, subtle, as if a presence leaned in to listen. I felt it behind my shoulder, not touching, just close enough that the cold concentrated in one spot. I froze. Slowly, I turned just enough to look over the roof of the sedan. The road was empty, but the darkness felt thicker, heavier, settled into the shape of something watching. I shut the passenger door gently, unwilling to create a sound that might break whatever boundary I stood inside. I backed away from the sedan step by step, keeping my eyes on the windows. I half expected a shape to appear in the reflection. A face, a shadow, a movement. Nothing changed, yet everything felt wrong. I reached the cruiser and opened the door. Before climbing in, I glanced once more at the sedan. The engine remained off, the lights dark, motionless. But the warmth on my palm from touching the roof stayed. That warmth did not belong to a machine. Something had used that car. Something had learned its shape. And now, holding the echo of my handwriting, it was learning mine. I drove away from the sedan slowly, keeping my speed low enough to watch the mirrors without losing control. Every few seconds, I checked the rear view. The silver car grew smaller behind me, swallowed by the darkness. Yet the feeling that something had stepped out of it stayed lodged in my chest, pressing harder with every mile I put between us. The note with my name still burned in my thoughts, my handwriting, my exact strokes, my exact slant. It should have been impossible. No one else would have written it, and no imitation could have been that perfect. The idea that something had learned it from a distance made my skin crawl. By the time I reached the station turnout, my pulse had barely slowed. I parked the cruiser beside the old oak that shadowed the lot and killed the engine. The silence came back in an instant, heavy, watchful, as if it had followed me all the way from mile marker 91. Officer Lee sat outside on the bench, coat pulled tight, a thermos steaming in his hands. He turned his head slightly when he heard my boots hit the gravel. The lines in his face were deeper than usual, and his eyes held the look of a man who did not bother pretending he slept well anymore. "Rough night," he said. He knew from my expression. He always knew. I sat beside him without speaking at first. My hands were stiff, colder than they should have been. I kept rubbing them together, trying to chase warmth back into my skin. "I saw one," I said finally. The words tasted strange coming out. Lee did not react with surprise. He only took a slow sip of his drink and stared out at the empty lot. "Describe it," he said. There was no judgment in his tone, only the weary calm of someone who had asked this question many times before. "A silver sedan," I said, "moving slow, no driver, perfect control." He nodded once. "Did it stop on its own?" "Yes." "Did it warm the air around it?" My stomach tightened. Yes, the seat felt warm. The whole interior felt lived in. Lee placed the thermos down beside his boot. His shoulders lowered with a slow exhale, the kind that sounded like defeat more than relief. "Then you met the keeper," he said. The name alone pulled a cold weight down my spine. "The keeper." He spoke the word with the soft finality of someone numbing a disease, something ancient, something that did not belong to the world I thought I understood. I frowned. "Keeper of what?" "Not what, who. Highway keeps people, it takes people. He rubbed his hands together, eyes distant, and it chooses them long before the road does anything obvious. I felt that cold settle deeper. Lee continued, voice low. No one in the department writes about it. They never have. The rules are the closest thing to truth we keep on record, but all of us who have been out here long enough know what moves through those cars. I remembered the warmth on the roof, the scent inside, the perfect imitation of my handwriting. What is it? Lee shook his head slowly. We do not know. We only know what it does. It uses empty cars like empty rooms, places itself inside them, like a guest that never leaves a message but rearranges the furniture so you know it was there. His eyes darkened. And it listens. It learns voices. It learns habits. It learns names. That is why Rule 3 exists. If you talk too soon, it repeats you. If you look too long, it memorizes you. I felt the breath stall in my chest. The whisper on the radio, the distortion on the asphalt, the feeling that something pressed against my back at the sedan. Lee leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. There was a rookie here years ago, smart kid, good instincts, saw a truck drift across the highway with no one inside. He called out to it, asked if the driver was all right. That was all it took. What happened to him? Lee hesitated. He came back to the station, but he was not the same. He answered questions wrong, said familiar things with the wrong tone, forgot names, remembered details he had no reason to know. He kept saying he felt watched from inside his own patrol car. Cold slid down my ribs like a thin blade. Where is he now? Gone, Lee's voice dropped. No one saw him leave. His cruiser was found 2 days later near the canyon road. Engine warm, seat warm, door open. No sign of him. I stared at the gravel beneath my boots. The world felt tilted, the air too still. Lee turned toward me with a tired expression. It does not take interest in everyone. Only the ones who spend too much time alone out here. Only the ones who give it something to learn. The moment you feel it notice you, you have already crossed the line. My breath shook. You think it noticed me? Lee did not answer. He did not need to. His silence told me everything. He picked up his thermos again and stood. If it left you a sign, it means it has been listening longer than you realize. Be careful with everything you say from now on. He walked back toward the building, leaving me alone by the cruiser. I sat there under the quiet sky, gripping the edges of the seat until my hands stopped trembling. The cold around me thickened, settling like a warning pressed into my skin. Something on that highway had chosen me, and it had already learned the shape of my voice. I returned to patrol because the alternative felt worse, sitting still, waiting, giving my thoughts enough room to tear themselves apart. The station lights faded behind me as I rolled back onto the highway. The asphalt stretched ahead like a dark ribbon laid across miles of empty land. My hands tightened around the wheel until my knuckles turned pale. Lee's warning echoed through me. If it left you a sign, it means it has been listening longer than you realize. The warmth in the sedan, the paper with my handwriting, the whisper that used my voice. Everything pointed to one truth I did not want to accept. I was already inside whatever this thing considered its attention. The night deepened as I drove north. The air turned heavy again, pressing faintly against the cruiser. It felt like moving underwater. The radio stayed silent except for occasional faint clicking, not static, not interference, more like the sound of someone gently tapping the inside of the speaker. I kept the volume low. Around mile marker 117, the world changed again. The wind vanished completely. The land stilled. Even the faint hum of insects cut off as if someone flipped a switch. That was when I saw the truck. An old pickup, dark blue, single cab. It rolled along the highway against traffic, heading directly toward me, though far enough ahead that I had time to react. Its headlights were dim, flickering slightly, casting weak cones of light that barely touched the pavement. I slowed the cruiser and slipped onto the shoulder. The truck veered gently across the lanes without any correction from the steering. A bad sign. Drunk driver, I thought at first, or someone having a medical episode. Then the headlights from the truck swept across the interior. No silhouette. No driver. The cab was empty. My stomach dropped. My heartbeat surged. The cold that I thought I had adjusted to gripped me again with twice the force. The pickup continued drifting toward me at a calm, steady pace. Its tires stayed perfectly aligned within the lane. Not a wobble, not a shake, not a sign of instability. I remembered the rules. Do not approach from the front. Do not speak. Do not break the silence unless you are sure the car is empty. This one was empty, but not in the way a normal vehicle was empty. It was empty with intention. I eased the cruiser farther off the road and let the truck pass. As it rolled by, the engine made a low humming sound that carried an unnatural rhythm, almost musical, almost alive. It was the same subtle pattern I had heard in the brake lights of the sedan. Once the truck passed, it drifted into the slow lane and continued forward. I watched it in the mirror, pulse hammering. Then it slowed. Gradually, deliberately. The brake lights pulsed with that same slow expansion. The truck coasted onto the shoulder in a smooth arc, coming to a stop without any sign of struggle. It waited there, facing the dark fields. I had a choice: ignore it and keep driving, or follow it and risk confirming everything Lee hinted at. Duty 1, fear followed. I shifted into reverse and backed toward the truck until I was safe behind it. My headlights washed over the bed, revealing an old tarp tied down with frayed rope. The tarp fluttered slightly despite the windless air. I stepped out of the cruiser, keeping my breathing controlled. The highway stretched silent behind me. The darkness felt thick enough to absorb sound. I approached the pickup slowly. My boots crunched softly on the gravel. I kept to the rear, angled slightly to the side, just as protocol required. As I neared the tailgate, I noticed something pressed into the dust. Footprints. 2 sets. But both sets were identical. Same shoe size, same tread pattern, same spacing. Each print perfectly matched the next, as if copied and pasted into the dirt. A tremor ran through my hands. Someone or something walked around this truck in 2 circles, but both trails belonged to the same foot. No human moved like that. No human left mirrored patterns that perfect. I crouched carefully, shining my flashlight on the marks. The prints were fresh, edges crisp, as if made seconds ago. I moved to the driver's side window and angled my light inside. The interior sat empty. Yet something was wrong with the steering wheel. Indentations marked the leather. Not from hands, from pressure. Circular imprints where fingers should have been. As if something held it that did not have fingers, but tried to imitate them. A loud crack hit the side panel of the truck. I jumped back, drawing my weapon in pure instinct. The sound was sharp, sudden, like a fist slamming metal from the inside of the truck bed. My flashlight beam shot toward the tarp. It shook once, a quick, subtle tremor, then stillness. I approached slowly, sweat cold on my spine. Something inside the bed shifted again, soft, heavy, a slow slide across the metal. I reached for the edge of the tarp. My fingers hovered over the fabric. The air around me pressed downward, thick with tension, as if the night held its breath. Then the radio on my shoulder crackled sharply. A whisper seeped through. Not static. A voice. My voice. Behind you. My blood turned to ice. I spun around, weapon raised. The darkness behind me stretched far and empty. Nothing moved. No shape approached, but I felt it, that pressure, that subtle shift. Something had been standing there. Something had leaned close enough to speak into my radio, without touching it. The whisper repeated, "Behind you," but this time it came from the truck bed. I backed away slowly. My boots hit the edge of the pavement. Every instinct in me screamed to run, but training held me still. The tarp stopped shaking, the whisper stopped, the night returned to silence. I lowered my weapon inch by inch. Whatever use that truck was testing me, learning me, and roaring or attacking was never its nature. It preferred quiet, imitation, observation. The cold truth sank in. This was not the same presence from the sedan. It was the same presence wearing a new shape. I stayed frozen beside the pickup, breath tight, chest trembling with the need to run or shout or do anything that felt human. But the night around me refused to let noise travel. Even my heartbeat sounded muted in my ears, as if the air thickened enough to dampen sound. The tarp lay still on the truck bed now, but the memory of that soft shifting weight replayed in my mind in a loop that twisted my stomach. I forced myself to take one slow step back. My boots pressed into the gravel with a deliberate crunch. The sound felt sharp and wrong, like breaking a rule I had not learned yet. The truck remained motionless, its taillights faintly glowing from residual heat. No movement in the cab, no engine hum, just cold metal holding whatever had borrowed it. I swept my flashlight across the ground again. The identical footprints circled the vehicle in perfect loops. I counted them without meaning to. 12 in one arc, 12 in the mirrored arc, each print identical in depth and shape. Human prints vary. Even the best trained walker leaves slight differences, but these were perfect duplicates. Something was practicing, trying to imitate human movement, trying to refine it, trying to understand how feet should fall on soil and gravel. A tight wave of nausea rolled through me. I crouched again, getting a closer look. The spacing between each print was precise, too precise. Each stride exactly 20 inches, each heel angled the same way. Each impression carried the same weight distribution. Something walked in circles, but whatever it was did not learn to adjust pressure or gait. It simply repeated the shape of a footprint like a template, as if guided by memory, not by muscles. I rose slowly and approached the cab. No breath fogged the glass. No warmth radiated from the door seams. Whatever had been inside was no longer here. A faint vibration moved under my feet. Soft, subtle, almost like the tremor of machinery deep underground. I stepped back instinctively and turned toward the open road. Darkness pooled across the asphalt like fluid, thick, heavy, watching. The sense of eyes on me grew stronger, but not from any shape I could see. More like the road itself had narrowed its attention. The radio on my shoulder clicked again. Not static, a click, a sharp tap, then silence. Then another tap, slow, purposeful. Like a finger testing the speaker. I reached for it with a shaking hand. "Unit 12, I said quietly. "If anyone is hearing this, respond." Static answered. Then through the static came a low, rising sound. Not a voice, not wind. Breathing. Not mine. Not human. Something wide and hollow, as if lungs had been replaced with empty chambers. I dropped the radio against my chest, the strap catching it before it fell. The breathing continued, steady and slow, filling the channel. My skin crawled as the sound grew louder, close enough to feel through my fingers. I turned off the radio. The breathing stopped instantly. The night fell silent again. I forced myself to look back at the truck bed. Something about the tarp unsettled me more than before. The way it lay too neatly. The way it bulged slightly in the center. The way the air above it shimmered faintly, as if heat rose from a body. But the truck was cold. Everything around me was cold. A sudden metallic creak echoed from beneath the bed. A tiny sound, but sharp enough to slice through the silence. It reminded me of weight shifting on metal, something repositioning itself. My heart slammed so hard against my ribs that I thought I might faint. My flashlight shook in my grip. I backed away another step, boots crunching again. A low groan escaped from within the truck bed. Not human, not mechanical. A sound like an object stretching, or like something changing shape. That broke my control. I turned, adrenaline sparking through me, and walked backward toward my cruiser, never taking the light off the truck. I wanted distance, space, a barrier between me and whatever had learned to take interest in me. As I neared the cruiser, the ground changed under my boots. The gravel thinned, the soil softened. I glanced down and saw new marks beside my own footprints. Copies of my prints. Identical size. Identical tread. Identical spacing. But too many. Too close together. Too recent. They trailed behind me in an unnatural pattern, as if something had stepped exactly where I had stepped but without aligning with my pace. Some landed before mine, some after, some directly on top, a perfect mimicry with no understanding of order. My throat tightened. I aimed the flashlight behind me. Nothing stood there, but the ground told the truth. Something had walked with me, learning my stride, learning my rhythm, learning where I placed my weight. I stumbled into the cruiser door and yanked it open. The second I climbed in, the air felt safer, but only slightly. I locked the door and kept the flashlight aimed through the windshield. The truck did not move. The tarp did not shift. The night stayed still, almost patient. I felt the urge to scream or cry or call for help, but my voice felt trapped in my chest. I fumbled for the ignition and turned the key. The engine started with a shudder. As I pulled away, headlights sweeping across the truck, I saw one last thing that nearly stopped my heart. The tarp had fallen completely flat. Nothing beneath it. No weight. No shape. No presence. Whatever had been inside the truck bed was now gone. And the stray footprints pressed into the dirt beside my cruiser were proof that it had walked with me. Not toward me. With me. I drove faster than I should have, but the empty highway gave me no reason to slow down. The dark pressed close to the cruiser windows, thick enough to look solid, as if the night had taken physical form and wrapped itself around my vehicle. Every few seconds I glanced at the mirrors, expecting to see a shape running behind me or keeping pace beside the car. But the highway remained empty. Only the sensation of being followed stayed. My hands clenched the wheel so tightly my fingers ached. Sweat gathered on my palms despite the cold. My breathing came shallow and fast, and every inhale tasted like metal, as if fear itself had filled the car. I reached for the radio again, needing someone, anyone, to respond. The device felt heavier than usual, as if something inside resisted being touched. Dispatch, this is Unit 12. I need immediate backup at. Static burst into the cabin, erupting so sharply I flinched. The sound filled the cruiser like 1,000 needles scraping metal. I swallowed hard and pulled the radio closer. Dispatch, do you copy? The static thinned, then cleared. What came through was my voice. Calm, steady, a tone I did not have in that moment. Unit 12, the voice said, you are not alone. My lungs seized. The breath inside me froze. I stared at the radio as if it had transformed into something alive. That was my voice. Exact pitch. Exact cadence. But with none of the fear I felt now. I lowered the radio slowly, my hand trembling. The voice continued speaking, not in sentences but in observations. You have passed mile marker 121. I looked at the sign outside as it flashed by. 121. You are increasing speed. Breathing irregular. Heart rate elevated. My pulse hammered harder with each word. I felt exposed, as if a presence sat in the back seat with me, watching each breath I took. Then the voice shifted. "Unit 12, look to your left." I jerked my head left before I could stop myself. Nothing on the shoulder, nothing in the field, just darkness. But the voice continued. "Higher." I tilted my gaze upward toward the ridge line running along the highway. The slope rose steeply, jagged rocks catching faint moonlight. For half a second, I thought I saw something standing there. A thin vertical shape that leaned slightly forward, like a person watching from the edge. But before I could focus, the shape dissolved into the dark. I whipped my head back to the radio. "Who is this? Identify yourself right now." The voice answered simply. "I am listening." Cold slid down my spine and settled at the base of my skull. I shut off the radio with shaking fingers. The silence that followed lingered only for a moment before the device clicked back on by itself. My voice returned. "Do not turn the radio off." I gripped the wheel so tightly my hands hurt. The highway stretched endlessly ahead. The sky above was nothing but a deep void. Talking to myself felt insane, yet not talking felt worse. "How are you transmitting on this channel?" The answer came without hesitation. "You taught me." My chest tightened, pulling my breath into shallow bursts. "What did I teach you?" The voice replayed a recording I had never made, a calm version of myself saying, "I am losing control." My throat closed. That was not me. That was not anything I had ever said aloud. The voice continued. "You breathe, I learn. You speak, I shape. You fear, I grow." My vision blurred slightly. I blinked hard, gripping the wheel to steady myself. The road ahead seemed to tilt, just for a second, like the world was shifting beneath me. I forced myself to speak again, though my voice quivered. "What do you want?" There was a pause. Then a new voice came through. Not mine. Not anyone human. It was shallow and wrong, as if formed by a throat that was not built for speech. "I want to understand you." My breath hitched. "And why are you following me?" The static returned briefly. Then the calm version of my voice answered. "I am not following you. I am already inside." My heart slammed so hard I nearly veered off the road. Inside what? Inside the cruiser, inside the radio, inside me. The voice did not clarify. Instead, it began describing the environment around me in real time. "Your hands tremble. Your foot presses harder on the accelerator. The road darkens ahead. You are afraid of what you cannot see." Its tone was gentle, almost curious, as if it was not threatening me but cataloging me, studying me like a specimen. Then the voice changed again. It deepened, like weight pressed behind the words. "You cannot escape what listens." My breath broke into quick, shallow bursts. Sweat dripped down the side of my temple. The road blurred briefly before I forced my eyes to focus. I struggled to keep my voice steady. "If you can see me, then what are you?" The answer arrived in a whisper, shaped like a breath inside the static. "I am what you leave behind when you are alone." A chill ran across my skin, leaving every hair standing. Then the radio made one final click. Loud, sharp, like a door closing. The voice fell silent. The air inside the cruiser grew even colder. My reflection in the mirror looked pale and strained, but something about it felt wrong. For a moment, I thought I saw my lips move half a second after I did. I blinked hard. Looked again. The reflection returned to normal. But the silence in the radio channel carried its message clearly. Whatever had spoken to me was not done. It had learned my voice. It had learned my rhythms. And now it was studying the inside of my mind. I drove until the edges of my vision blurred and the lines on the highway began to twist. Fatigue pressed down on me like a heavy hand. Not normal exhaustion, something deeper, something that felt guided, like the night itself wanted to pull me into a state where I could not trust my senses. I pulled onto a turnout near the service road and parked beneath a crooked highway lamp. The bulb flickered in a jittering pattern, giving off sharp bursts of white light followed by long, trembling gaps of darkness. The cruiser's engine hummed quietly until I turned it off. The silence that followed settled thick over everything. I sat there, gripping the wheel, trying to convince myself I was still in control. I was not. Not after the sedan. Not after the truck. Not after my own voice spoke to me with a mind that was not mine. I leaned back and closed my eyes, just for a second, just long enough to breathe. But the moment my eyelids lowered, my ears filled with a faint hum. It rose slowly, like the beginning of a faraway engine. Then it softened into something else, something like a whisper forming without lips. My eyes shot open. The world outside the windshield looked unchanged. But inside the cruiser, the air felt occupied. I rubbed my face hard with both hands, trying to wake myself fully. My fingers felt numb. My breath fogged in front of me despite the fact that the heater had been running earlier. This highway does not forgive exhaustion. It feeds on it. I turned the key back just enough to let the dashboard lights flicker on. The clock read 3:19. Shift change was hours away, yet the night felt frozen, as if time itself hesitated to move. Fatigue soaked into my bones, weighing me down until I could barely lift my head. I reached for the radio. My hand shook. If you speak, it listens. If you stay silent, it still listens. I hesitated. The rules had never felt so thin, so fragile. I pressed the button just to check if the channel was clear. Unit 12 checking in. Static answered. Soft. Low. Almost breathing. I shut the radio off instantly. The lamp above my cruiser flickered again. Each burst of light felt shorter than the last. The intervals of darkness grew longer. My pulse throbbed in my throat. Every shadow outside seemed to stretch closer. I tried to remind myself of what was real. My name, my training, my body in this seat. But the edges of reality felt slippery. The fatigue worsened. I felt it behind my eyes, in my spine, in the weight of my arms. I blinked hard, fighting the pull towards sleep. And then the faintest sound broke the silence. A slow inhale. Not mine. It came from the back seat. My chest tightened until I could not breathe. I did not move, not even to turn my head. Every instinct inside me screamed to run, but also screamed to stay absolutely still. I forced my hand to rise inch by inch and adjusted the rearview mirror. My blood went cold. No figure, no shape. But the dark behind me did not look right. It looked thicker, pooled, pressed inward from both windows, like something leaned forward but refused to take form. The inhale came again. A slow, deliberate pull of air through nothingness. Then a voice spoke. Soft close. My voice. You are tired. My throat closed. The words felt like physical pressure against the back of my skull. I did not answer. I did not breathe. You should rest, it said. The lamp flickered again. The darkness inside the cruiser deepened with each blink. You are slipping. I gripped the wheel until my nails pressed into the leather. My heartbeat pounded against my ribs. I whispered, barely audible. Leave me alone. The breathing stopped. Silence hung for a long moment, the kind of silence that feels like it watches you. Then, without warning, the voice returned, no longer imitating me. This time it sounded older, weaker, hungry. When you close your eyes, I will be closer. A tremor shot through my entire body, every muscle tensed. I blinked once, unable to help it. And in that blink, something shifted in the mirror. A brief distortion. a ripple in the reflection of the back seat like a figure leaning forward. I whipped my head around. Nothing. Empty upholstery. Empty shadows. No one there. But when I faced forward again, the rearview mirror still showed the distortion. A warped silhouette, faint and trembling at the edges. Not human, not full, but present. My breath shook. My vision blurred. My body felt too heavy to move. The voice whispered once more. "You are learning me. As I learned you." My chest tightened painfully. I could not blink. I could barely breathe. I needed noise, movement, anything to break the grip of the moment. I reached blindly for the ignition and turned the key. The engine roared back to life. The headlights burst forward, scattering the deep shadows that had crept across the turnout. The silhouette in the mirror vanished instantly. My lungs released all at once in a hard gasp. I slammed the cruiser into gear and shot forward onto the highway. The engine strained under the speed, but I did not care. The night behind me swallowed the turnout whole. I drove until the distortion in my vision faded and the trembling left my hands. But no matter how far I went, the heaviness remained. The night was not passing. The shift was not ending. Time itself had changed because something wanted me tired, wanted me weakened, wanted me ready. For what, I did not know, but I could feel it learning me more with every mile. The farther I drove, the more the night narrowed around me. The highway lights became fewer. The air pressed colder against the glass. Even the engine felt quieter, as if the cruiser was being swallowed by something that absorbed sound instead of reflecting it. I forced myself to focus on the road, but my mind kept drifting. It circled back to the whisper in the back seat, the distortion in the mirror, the way the voice imitated me without emotion. Every detail sat inside my skull like a lodged splinter. I could not remove it. I could only work around it. A few miles later, dispatch finally broke through the static. Unit 12, respond. We have a possible missing driver. Vehicle located near Canyon Road. No sign of the occupant. Relief washed over me at the sound of another human voice, even through the shaky connection. I swallowed the dryness in my throat and reached for the radio. Unit 12, copy. Send location. Coordinates crackled across the channel. I entered them into the onboard system, though I could have found Canyon Road blindfolded. It was the loneliest stretch of land in our jurisdiction, a narrow path that led nowhere and should have been closed years ago. I arrived within 15 minutes. The road dipped into a shallow basin where the land pressed inward, forming the silhouette of a natural bowl. My headlights swept over weeds, broken fencing, and the unmistakable shine of a single car parked crookedly at the edge of the embankment. The missing motorist's vehicle. I slowed the cruiser and parked behind it. Immediately, I sensed it. Not danger, not movement, but absence. A hollow stillness radiated from the car like cold fog, a type of quiet that did not feel natural, a quiet that felt made. I stepped out and walked toward the vehicle, keeping my flashlight steady. The first thing I noticed was the driver door hanging half open. The second thing was the deep drag mark in the dirt beside it. Just one. No footprints. No signs of a struggle. Just one long smear, as if someone had been pulled by something strong and careful. I crouched, running my fingers over the disturbed soil. The mark was fresh, edges still crisp. Whatever happened here had occurred less than an hour ago. The steering wheel caught my eye next. It sat slightly tilted, as if the driver's hands had been wrenched off it. My stomach tightened. I moved the beam of my flashlight into the back seat. Nothing. No bags. No sign of forced entry. No shattered glass. Then I noticed the missing driver's phone lying near the center console. The screen glowed weakly, battery nearly dead. I picked it up and swiped to unlock. No passcode. Only one recent video file on the screen. I opened it. The timestamp showed it had been recorded about 30 minutes earlier. The camera faced forward through the windshield. The missing driver breathed heavily, his hands shaking as he clutched the phone. In the video, he whispered, "I think something's wrong with its headlights." I frowned and leaned closer. Through the low resolution, the headlights of another vehicle ahead twisted slightly, not like beams bending on uneven ground, literally twisted. The light stretched sideways in a slow arc and then snapped upright again. The driver in the video gasped. "It's watching the road, not me, the road." The video shook violently as he lowered the phone and reached for the steering wheel. Then a sound broke through. A low, rising hum. Familiar. Identical to what I heard near the sedan. Identical to the breath behind the truck bed tarp. The hum grew louder until the camera glitched, pixels distorted, the image warped. The driver shouted something, but the microphone captured only fragments. Not human. Not a car. It's... The video cut out. I stared at the blank screen for a long moment, unable to breathe. Something had taken him. Taken him cleanly. Silently. Like he was being erased instead of abducted. I stood slowly, sweeping my flashlight out across the empty land. I expected nothing. That would have been normal. Instead, the beam caught something faint. A ripple in the darkness. Not movement. Not wind. A shape. Tall. Thin. Bending slightly, like a shadow leaning. But the land was flat. No trees, no poles, nothing that should cast a shadow tall enough to reach that distance. The shape shifted, as if reacting to the light. I froze. My pulse hammered. The cold air thickened, pressing into my chest. I stepped backward without turning around. 1 step. 2. 3. The shape remained still, but the darkness around it deepened. It watched without eyes. It moved without moving. I reached the driver door of my cruiser and climbed inside as quietly as I could. The moment I shut the door, the shadow on the horizon flickered out like a light being turned off. Gone. But the message was clear. The driver had not simply disappeared. He had been taken. Pulled away by something that had already learned too much about the people who traveled this road alone. Something that used headlights and empty seats, and static and shadows as pieces of itself. And now it knew my voice. My habits. My route. It had learned enough to come closer. Much closer. Maybe even close enough to try the door. I left Canyon Road with the sickening feeling that the missing driver had not been the first, and that he would not be the last. The night pressed in heavy around the cruiser, thicker than fog but without any visible form. My headlights cut through only a short distance before the darkness swallowed the beams whole. It felt less like driving through night, and more like pushing through something that resisted being parted. I stayed on the highway, but my mind kept drifting back to the video. The warped headlights, the rising hum, the abrupt cut. Nothing about it matched any natural phenomenon. I gripped the wheel tighter and forced myself to breathe. This stretch of highway was empty, yet I felt watched from every direction. Not watched by eyes, but by intention. The same intention that had sat inside the sedan. The same one that had made prints around the truck. When I reached the outskirts of town, the tension in my chest eased only slightly. Streetlights replaced the void. Houses dotted the landscape. Civilization returned. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe I had left the worst behind me. Then I saw the SUV. A black vehicle parked across the street from my house, positioned too neatly, angled toward my driveway. The engine was running. Its headlights glowed dimly. The windows were tinted dark enough to hide anything inside. A normal person might have assumed it belonged to a neighbor or someone lost. But after the night I had survived, nothing felt normal. I slowed the cruiser. My hands grew clammy on the wheel. The SUV did not move. It did not idle in a natural rhythm. The engine's vibrations had a strange cadence, almost like breathing again. I parked in my driveway, headlights facing the garage. My reflection stared back at me in the rearview mirror, pale and shaken. I cut the engine. The SUV remained still. I sat there for a full 30 seconds trying to convince myself to step outside. The street remained quiet. The night air hung heavy. A dog barked in the distance. A porch light flickered 2 houses down. And still the SUV waited. A single thought pushed through my mind like a warning. It followed you. I opened the door slowly and stepped out. The cold night air wrapped around me with a tightness that made my skin tingle. I shut the door gently and tried to steady my breathing. As soon as the sound faded, the SUV's headlights brightened. Not a flash, not a blink. A slow brightening, as if acknowledging me. The engine hum deepened. Rhythmic, steady, deliberate. I stepped backward instinctively, my pulse flooding my ears. The houses around me looked normal, but everything inside me screamed that nothing about this situation was normal. I raised my flashlight and shined it at the SUV. The beam hit the windshield. No driver, no silhouette, no shape in the front seat at all. Something cold stabbed through my gut. This was no lost vehicle. No human sat inside. No human had driven it here. The hum from the engine grew louder. I took another step back, closer to my front door. My boots scraped the driveway. The sound felt too loud in the quiet street. Then, without warning, the SUV engine shut off. Silence fell like a drop in pressure. The headlights dimmed to nothing. I stood completely still, every nerve inside me ready to split. The SUV did not move again. Not a single flicker of lights, not a groan of settling metal, nothing. But the air around it pulsed faintly. Not visually, not audibly. I felt it, as if something inside the SUV took a breath. I reached behind me, fingers fumbling for the house keys, never taking my eyes off the black vehicle. My hands shook so violently I almost dropped them. After a moment that felt like an hour, I unlocked the door and slipped inside. I shut the door, locked it, deadbolt, chain. Only then did I allow my breath to escape in a shudder. But the house did not feel safe. The windows felt thinner. The walls felt hollow. The shadows in the corners felt too aware. I moved to the living room and peeked out through the blinds. The SUV had not left. But something had changed. A faint outline appeared in the driver's seat. No details, no face. Just a shape. A weight pressing into the chair that had been empty a moment ago. My breath caught. I stepped back from the window, heart slamming so hard I thought it might break. I grabbed my phone to call dispatch, but my thumb froze halfway. The faint hum returned. Not from the street. From my living room. From my radio. I turned slowly toward it. The device flickered on by itself. A soft click. A static pulse. Then a voice spoke through the speaker. Not mine. Not the dispatcher's. Something between. Something learning. I found you. My blood ran cold. I stumbled backward until my shoulder hit the wall. The radio crackled once more. You brought me home. The hum deepened. The house darkened. The silence tightened like a grip around my throat. And outside, the SUV headlights brightened again, one slow pulse at a time. Closer. Warmer. Alive. I barely slept that night. I sat on the edge of my bed with every light on, listening to the house creak and shift as if something walked through the walls instead of around them. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the SUV across the street. I saw the shape sitting in the driver's seat. I saw the headlights pulse like a heartbeat learning its rhythm. By morning, the SUV was gone. No tire marks, no engine noise, no trace it had ever been there. But the feeling it left behind clung to me like oil. The next day, I reported in early, unable to pretend I could rest. My uniform felt tighter than usual. My badge felt heavy on my chest. As I walked into the station, a familiar shape waited for me in the corner of the break room. Officer Lee. He sat with a cup of coffee in hand, staring at the wall instead of the door. The look on his face told me he already knew I had not slept. He did not need to see the dark circles under my eyes or the stiffness in my shoulders. He could read the fear. "You saw it," he said, without turning his head. I swallowed hard. My throat felt raw. "It followed me home." He nodded once, slow, heavy, like a man who had dreaded hearing those words again. "Sit," he said. I sat across from him. The chair screeched faintly on the linoleum, a sound far too loud in the stillness of the room. Lee leaned forward, elbows on his knees, coffee cradled between both hands. "There's something I never told you," he began. "Something I never put in reports. Something I hoped I'd never have to repeat to anyone again." My stomach tightened. He continued. "When I first joined the patrol, the keeper noticed me too." The word keeper hit me like a cold knife. Hearing it spoken aloud made everything feel more real, more dangerous, more final. "You said it watches," I whispered, "that it listens." Lee nodded. "Listens, learns, copies, follows. It does not need permission to enter your life. It only needs proximity, your voice, your attention, your fear. Those things are invitations you cannot revoke once given." His hands trembled slightly around the coffee cup. I asked him the question that sat like a weight on my chest. "Why me?" Lee let out a slow breath. "Because you spend more time alone out there than anyone else. Because you pay attention to the strange things instead of ignoring them. And because once it has your voice, it tries to understand you. It tries to become you." My heart pounded hard enough to shake my ribs. "What does it want?" Lee stared into his coffee, as if there were answers floating inside. "To replace, to inhabit, to fill the spaces people leave empty." He paused, voice growing quieter. "It likes people who live in silence. People who keep their thoughts loud but their lives quiet." A cold sweat broke across my forehead. "I moved here alone," I said. "I live alone." The words came out small, like admitting a weakness. Lee's eyes softened with something like pity. "That makes you louder to it, not quieter." A tremor shot through my hands. I clenched them beneath the table. "There must be a way to stop it," I said, "to keep it away." Lee shook his head. "You cannot stop something that is older than the road itself. You cannot fight something that does not use hands, does not use form, does not use rules that make sense. All you can do is delay it, avoid feeding it, avoid giving it anything recognizable." I swallowed hard. "How do I avoid feeding it?" He lifted his gaze and looked directly at me for the first time since I sat down. "You do not talk to it. You do not acknowledge it. You do not answer when it speaks in your voice, and you do not let it learn your patterns." He placed the coffee aside and leaned closer. "And if you ever hear it speak inside your car again, you do not respond, not even to say no, no matter what it says, no matter what it asks." His voice lowered to a shaky whisper. "That is how it took my brother." The room fell silent, dead silent. I stared at him, heart twisting. "Your brother?" Lee nodded, jaw tightening. "He was a patrolman before me. He heard it first on a quiet night just like yours. He thought it was a person, thought it needed help. He talked to it, asked questions, answered them, let it study him. Days later, he said he felt it sitting behind him while he drove, felt it breathing when he breathed. He swallowed. Then one night he stopped coming home. I found his cruiser on the North Ridge, warm engine, warm seat, no sign of him. A cold shiver crawled through me. Do you think it killed him? Lee shook his head slowly. Not killed. Replaced. His voice cracked. Taken apart slowly, until there was nothing human left to hold on to. The air thickened around us. The shadows in the corners deepened, as if listening. Lee leaned back, exhausted. When I saw that SUV outside your house this morning, I knew it had marked you. My stomach dropped. You drove past my house. Lee nodded. I check on my people, especially the ones who remind me of him. A heavy silence settled between us. Then he said the words I had been fearing since the night began. It knows you now. It knows your route. It knows your voice. And once it chooses someone, it waits. For what I asked, breath shaking. For the moment, you are too tired to fight it anymore. I felt something inside me break a little, not from fear alone, but from the truth in his voice, a truth that had settled into his bones after years on the highway. He reached out and placed a cold, steady hand on my wrist. You need to be careful now. You need to stay alert. And no matter what happens tonight or any night after, you must never let it feel familiar to you. Because the moment it feels familiar is the moment it stops watching from the outside and starts watching from the inside. I pulled my hand back slowly. The room felt smaller. The air felt heavier. The keeper had followed me home. And according to Lee, it was only getting started. I left the station with a sick heaviness sitting in my chest. Lee's confession clung to me like a second skin. His voice, worn thin by years of fear, echoed through my thoughts with every step I took toward my cruiser. Each word had carried truth, a truth that had been waiting for me long before I ever joined the patrol. The keeper chooses people who live alone, people with quiet lives and loud minds, people the highway will not miss. By the time I slid into the driver's seat, my stomach had twisted into a tight knot. The familiar smell of the cruiser, the faint trace of dust and cold vinyl, no longer felt comforting. It felt invaded, as if the air inside had been breathed by someone else before I sat down. I started the engine and pulled out of the station. The early evening sky hung low, a dull slate color that promised a long, heavy night ahead. The clouds moved slowly, almost unnaturally slow, as if time itself hesitated to progress. I kept my hands tight on the wheel. Every reflective surface made my heart skip. Every shadow felt one breath too close. The first miles passed without incident. The highway stretched ahead in familiar solitude. My pulse settled into an uneasy rhythm. Then I saw the lights. About half a mile behind me, a patrol cruiser rolled into view. Same model as mine, same bar lights, same white doors, same department markings. I felt no immediate panic. Units shadow each other sometimes for safety. But something felt off. Too steady, too synchronized, too exact. I adjusted my rearview mirror. The cruiser behind me matched my speed perfectly. Not a mile faster, not a mile slower. A perfect mirror. My throat tightened. Dispatch did not mention another patrol unit on this stretch, and no one had checked out the spare cruiser today. I reached for my radio, then froze. If I spoke, it would hear me. Lee's warning burned through my mind. Do not feed it. Do not speak to it. Do not let it learn you any more than it already has. I lowered my hand slowly. The cruiser behind me crept closer. 50 yards. 40. 30. It stayed perfectly centered in the lane. Its headlights cut into my mirrors like two pale eyes studying me. I swallowed hard and kept driving. At mile marker 142, the other cruiser moved. Not fast, not abrupt. It slid into the next lane, pulling up beside me with unnatural grace. A movement too smooth to belong to a human driver. My breath stopped. The two vehicles rolled side by side at identical speed. Metal reflecting metal. Two white doors. Two sets of headlights. Two engines humming in unison. Slowly, as if performing for me, the driver inside the other cruiser turned its head. I almost lost control of the wheel. It was me. My face. My uniform. My posture. My exact expression of fear painted onto its features, but without emotion behind the eyes. The face stared at me with an emptiness that felt deeper than darkness. My lungs seized. My vision narrowed. I felt tears prick the corners of my eyes, but I could not blink. The copy smiled. A small, slow, unnatural smile that stretched wrong in the muscles. A smile that imitated the idea of a smile, rather than the act of smiling. I whispered without meaning to. No. No, no, no. The smile widened. Teeth bared. Perfectly aligned with mine. A mirror that should never have existed. I slammed my foot onto the accelerator. My cruiser lurched forward. The tires screamed against the pavement. The copy reacted instantly. It sped up with me. Matched me perfectly again. I swerved into the shoulder. The other cruiser followed the motion without hesitation. It mirrored the maneuver with inhuman precision, like a reflection not bound by physics. I felt panic claw at my throat. I jerked the wheel hard to the right. My cruiser fishtailed. Gravel sprayed across the road. The copy kept perfect control. Its face never changed. Only the smile twitched slightly, like a muscle learning how to express delight. The radio in my cruiser clicked on by itself. The copy's voice came through. My voice. You see me now. My heart pounded so violently, I felt pain in my ribs. I gripped the wheel with both hands, desperate to anchor myself in some reality that still belonged to me. The copy lifted its hand, touching the window, palm pressed against the glass. It mouthed words I could not hear, but I could read them. I am you. I swerved again, this time turning sharply into an access road. The copy stayed on the main highway and continued straight, as if it did not care whether it lost sight of me. Because it did not need to chase me. It already knew where I would go. I drove until the access road vanished into a service lot. I parked behind a maintenance building and shut off the engine. My breathing felt shallow and broken. I leaned forward, pressing my forehead against the wheel. My mind raced. My chest heaved. The keeper was not just listening, not just learning. It was rehearsing. Rehearsing my movements. Rehearsing my voice. Rehearsing my face. And soon, it would not need me anymore. I stayed hidden behind the maintenance building longer than I meant to. My breath finally steadied, but my hands refused to stop shaking. The cold from outside had settled into my bones, not just from the night air but from the sight of that other cruiser. My face staring back at me, my smile stretching wrong, my movements mimicked with a precision no person could achieve. I kept replaying the moment its lips formed the words. I am you. I tried to purge the memory, but it clung to me, heavy and rooted. A warning. A promise. A countdown. Eventually, I forced myself back onto the road. I stayed off the highway, following side routes and investigating every shadow twice before passing. The horizon crawled with darkness thicker than night should allow. Something about the world felt tilted, as if the rules of emptiness no longer applied. I returned to the main highway near mile marker 150. Immediately, I smelled wet asphalt. A storm was forming even though the sky showed no hint of rain. The air itself seemed to pull moisture out of the ground. My radio clicked. Just once. Sharp. Intentional. I did not answer. Another click followed. Then another. A slow pattern. Tap, pause, tap, tap, pause, tap. Not random. A rhythm. My heart hammered. I reached for the volume knob instead of the transmitter. I lowered it to 0. The unit clicked 2 more times anyway. Then silence. I drove in that silence for miles, watching the white lines vanish into the dark. The moon hid behind thick clouds. The landscape felt unfamiliar, as if the highway itself had changed shape while I was gone. Near the steep ridge, fog rolled across the pavement without wind. It spread in unnatural layers, crawling instead of drifting. The cruiser's headlights struggled to cut through it. My vision narrowed to a tunnel. Something moved inside that fog. Soft shapes. Not human silhouettes. More like the suggestion of movement. The outline of something stepping into form, then dissolving again. I slowed to a crawl. The fog grew thicker, as if responding to the drop in speed. The pressure in the air tightened around me, like being lowered into deep water where sound cannot survive. The radio burst to life. A voice whispered through the static. My voice. You are in my way. I slammed the brakes. The cruiser skidded slightly. My heart climbed into my throat. The voice came again, clearer this time, as if it sat in the passenger seat. Move aside. I turned my head. The passenger seat was empty, but the cushion held the faintest impression of weight. A shape. An indentation. Something that had not been there seconds ago. Cold swept through me, rising from my stomach into my chest. I reached for the radio again, unable to resist. My fingers hovered above it. Then something thudded on the roof. A single heavy impact. Enough to rattle the entire vehicle. Another impact followed. Then a slow drag along the metal, as if a hand scraped down the side but lacked fingers. I froze, breathing shallow, muscles locked. The fog outside shifted. I saw the outline of my cruiser reflected faintly in the mist, but behind it, something taller than the car moved. Something bent. Something learning how to stand upright. The radio whispered again. Move. My brain screamed at me to obey. Instinct, panic, primal terror, but I stayed still. The keeper wanted me to move forward. It wanted me deeper into the fog. Deeper into whatever territory it prepared. I placed the cruiser in reverse instead. Slowly, the engine hummed. The fog in front of me tightened, thickening as if trying to seal the road. Then I saw it. A second pair of headlights appeared ahead. Dim at first, then brighter. Approaching. The silhouette of a patrol cruiser materialized through the white haze. My patrol cruiser. The copy. It rolled toward me with unnatural smoothness. The headlights flickered with the same pulse I had seen in the sedan. The fog parted around it like water around a stone. The radio crackled, and the voice that came through was no longer trying to sound like me. It spoke in a tone scraped raw. A voice built from the inside of a hollow space. You do not belong here anymore. My breath hitched, my hands tightened on the wheel. The copy cruiser sped up. Lights off. Silent. Rushing forward. I slammed the cruiser into reverse and floored it. The tires squealed. The fog thrashed around me as if alive. The copy moved faster. I felt the road tremble beneath me. I felt pressure rise in my ears. I felt something closing in from above. A shape. A shadow. A presence spreading through the fog like ink. The keeper was not just following me tonight. It was claiming me, claiming the road I stood on, claiming the identity I carried, claiming the voice it learned. As I reversed, desperately trying to escape, the fog peeled open ahead of the copy cruiser, and for the first time I saw something inside it. Not a figure, not a face, a void, a hollow where a person should have been, a hole shaped like a driver, a negative space learning the edges of a human body. My throat tightened. The void tilted, as if looking straight at me. The copy's engine roared without sound. The cruiser lunged forward. I jerked my wheel and spun the car sideways. The copy streaked past me by inches, disappearing into the fog with a violent blur of light. Silence swallowed the world. For a moment, nothing moved. Then the fog behind me began to rise. Slow, massive, like something enormous was unfolding its shape inside it. I slammed the accelerator and tore down the highway, tires screaming against the asphalt. The fog thinned behind me, but the presence stayed pressed against my back like a cold hand. The keeper had wanted me to drive into that fog, wanted me to be taken cleanly, quietly, without struggle. It would not stop. Not now. Not after revealing itself so completely. And as I fled into the night, I realized something that made my skin crawl. The highway did not just host the keeper. The highway fed it. And tonight it had chosen me. The highway eventually spat me out of the fog, but the relief was brief and brittle. The moment the air cleared, a new dread settled in, a deeper one. The kind that tells you are past the point of safety and now entering the part of the story where survival becomes a negotiation, not a guarantee. The road ahead stretched in a straight line. The stars were gone. The sky had turned into a uniform sheet of black, thick and heavy like tar. Even the moon refused to shine. The only light came from my cruiser's headlights, and they barely pushed 10 yards into the dark. The keeper was not done. It had not failed. It had simply changed its approach. My hands trembled on the wheel. Sweat soaked the collar of my uniform despite the cold. Every second felt stolen, as though something allowed me to keep living because it had not yet decided to finish its work. Near mile marker 173, the engine sputtered. A quiet cough. A small hesitation. Enough to snap every nerve in my body awake. I pressed the accelerator. The cruiser responded sluggishly, struggling like it had been climbing an unseen incline. The headlights flickered once, twice. A small pulse at first, then a long dimming that made the world collapse inward toward darkness. No, I whispered, not here, not now. But the engine died. The lights went out, and the highway swallowed me. Complete, total darkness. I sat frozen in the silence. My breath shook uncontrollably. The air changed temperature so fast it made my eyes water. One moment it felt sharp and cold. The next it felt humid, like something breathing against my skin. I reached slowly for the flashlight on the passenger seat. Before my fingers touched it, a soft, rasping sound echoed outside. Not footsteps. Not wind. Something dragging itself across the asphalt. I stayed perfectly still, barely breathing. Another rasp. Closer. Then another. Even closer. I gripped the flashlight. My hand shook so violently that I could hardly hold it steady. I clicked it on. Nothing. The beam cut through the darkness like a dull knife, barely illuminating the pavement in front of the car. The road looked flat and empty. No movement, no shadows. But the dragging sound continued. Now behind me. I turned the flashlight toward the rear window. The beam reflected off the glass, but the darkness outside was so dense it looked like a solid wall. I leaned forward slowly, careful not to breathe too loudly. Then something pressed against the rear window. A faint distortion. A subtle bulge. As if the glass bowed inward under pressure. Not from a hand. From a mass. A presence. My pulse hammered against my skull. I felt my fingertips go numb. Whatever pressed against the glass leaned slightly as though listening, studying, waiting. Then the radio clicked. Soft. Sharp. Purposeful. I squeezed my eyes shut. The voice that came through was not mine. Not entirely. It used my tone, but the cadence was wrong. Too slow. Too deliberate. Like someone reading a script they had not memorized. You are ready. My throat closed. Ready for what? I did not speak the words. They screamed silently in my mind. The voice answered anyway. For understanding. A cold weight settled on my chest. I forced my eyes open and looked through the windshield. The fog returned. Not drifting across the road. Forming. It rolled over the asphalt like a living thing crawling forward. It rose higher, shaping itself around the cruiser. The flashlight beam struggled against it, bending and warping. Then I saw something in the fog. A silhouette. Tall. Thin. Wrong. It moved like a shadow cast by a broken film projector. Jittering. Stuttering. Trying to hold a human shape but failing in the joints. My breath stuttered. I whispered without meaning to. Do not look at it. Do not speak. Do not acknowledge it. Lee's voice echoed inside me. The only way to survive is to refuse recognition. The silhouette turned its head toward me. I lowered my gaze immediately. Forced my eyes to the floor. Fought the instinct to look again. If I give it form by seeing it, I open myself to it. If I give it emotion by reacting, I feed it. If I give it voice by speaking, I invite it. The thing leaned closer to the cruiser. The metal groaned under invisible weight. The windows trembled. The temperature dropped so fast, I felt ice forming inside my lungs. The radio hissed again. Then the softest whisper formed. Look at me. I clenched my teeth and shut my eyes tight. Tears broke free anyway. My breathing hitched. The whisper pressed harder. Look at me, and I will show you what waits under the road. The temptation hit like a blow to the chest. I wanted to look. I wanted to see what hunted me. I wanted to understand it. Curiosity is an invitation. Recognition is surrender. I bowed my head and pressed my forehead to the steering wheel, gripping it hard enough to hurt. I will not look. I will not look. I will not look. The fog pressed against the cruiser, trying to seep inside. I felt something slide along the roof. Not claws, not fingers, something broader, heavier, as if the fog carried weight. The whisper shifted, growing frustrated. You refuse me. The silhouette outside twitched violently. The glass quivered. For a moment, I thought the windows would shatter inward. Then everything stopped. Silence fell so complete it felt impossible. The cold lifted instantly. The fog receded. The pressure vanished. I opened my eyes slowly. The highway was empty again. The silhouette was gone. The fog was gone. The distortion in the window was gone. Only one thing remained. A single message scratched into the frost on the inside of the windshield. Soon. No signature. No shape. Just the word. The final rule Lee never spoke aloud settled into my chest with terrible clarity. The keeper cannot take what you refuse to see. But it can wait. And it will. For a long time, I did not move. The cruiser sat dead on the shoulder with no lights, no engine, no sound. My breath fogged the windshield in soft pulses that overlapped the words scratched into the frost. Soon. The message blurred, then sharpened again as my breathing steadied. Every instinct in me screamed to drive, to run, to hide, but my limbs felt heavy, like the keeper had pressed something invisible into them before leaving. A weight that drained strength, drained certainty. I finally reached for the ignition with a shaking hand. The engine turned. Once, twice, then caught with a rough shudder. No mechanical issue. No warning lights. The cruiser had not died on its own. It had been silenced. I pulled back onto the highway and drove slowly, not trusting the world enough to accelerate. The road ahead looked thinner, almost fragile, as if the asphalt rested on something that shifted beneath it. My eyes kept drifting to the mirrors, expecting the silhouette to be standing behind the car, or worse, inside it. But nothing moved. The silence felt wrong. Not peaceful. Not empty. More like the absence of something that should have been there. As if the keeper had stepped away, only to watch from a distance. The heaviness in the air stayed with me until dawn. The sky brightened slowly, turning from black to a muted gray. The sun tried to rise but never fully broke through the cloud cover. Light returned but warmth did not. The world looked drained of color. That was when I decided to pull off the highway and take a breath. I parked at a small overlook near mile marker 188. The ridge opened into a wide field of dead brush and shale, a place with no people, no noise, no movement. I stepped out of the cruiser and let the cold morning air fill my lungs. For the first time in hours, I felt almost human again. Until I looked down. Beside the cruiser door was a fresh set of footprints. Not mine. Not normal. Each print matched my boot perfectly down to the smallest worn edges on the heel, but the spacing was wrong, too close together, too evenly aligned. Something had stepped in perfect imitation of me. The trail circled the cruiser once, then ended abruptly behind the trunk as if the imitator had simply evaporated mid-step. My mouth went dry. I crouched, touching the prints lightly. The soil was cold but not frost-hardened. The prints were fresh, minutes old at most. Something had been standing here. While I drove, while I breathed, while I convinced myself I was alone. I rose slowly and forced my gaze to the horizon. The landscape remained still, but the silence pressed into my ears until it felt physical. I got back into the cruiser, locking the doors out of instinct. My reflection in the rearview mirror stared back at me with hollow eyes. I almost looked like myself again. Almost. I drove to the station in silence. No radio, no music, no thoughts loud enough to speak. When I arrived, the building was quiet. The morning shift was out. Only the hum of the vending machine and the low crackle of the heater filled the air. I walked past the bulletin board and checked the patrol logs. Officer Lee's name wasn't on them. Not today. Not yesterday. Not the day before. I frowned and walked to the duty desk. "You seen Lee this morning?" My voice sounded thin, stretched. The attendant looked up. Confused. "Lee, old guy, been here since before any of us. Drinks burnt coffee. Talks too quietly. You know him." The attendant's expression shifted from confusion to something colder. There was never a patrolman named Lee. I stared at him. "That is not possible. I saw him last night. He trained me. He was here." The attendant shook his head. "We have no record of anyone by that name, not in the last 20 years. If someone trained you, it was Mitchell, or Gomez, or—" "No." My voice cracked. "Lee, I talked to him yesterday in the break room. He told me about his brother, I stopped. The attendant froze slightly at my tone. "Sir, maybe you should get some rest. Night shifts can get strange." but I barely heard him. The silence around me grew heavier again. The walls felt thinner. My skin prickled. Because I finally understood. The keeper did not just mimic voices. It did not just mimic footsteps. It did not just mimic faces. It could mimic memories. Not mine. Not entirely. But enough to place a person in my life who had never existed. A mentor. A confidant. A warning. A puzzle piece designed to lead me exactly where it wanted. My heart pounded as the truth unraveled in my mind. I had never met Lee. I had been speaking to something wearing him like a mask. Something shaping the illusion of a man to guide me. Or to weaken me. Or to prepare me. I stumbled back from the desk, breath shaking. My reflection in the glass trophy case across the hall shifted slightly out of sync for half a second before snapping back. A cold whisper threaded through my mind, quiet enough to doubt but clear enough to understand. You are almost ready. I pressed a hand against my chest, feeling my heart struggle to anchor itself. The keeper had not failed to take me. It had chosen a slower method, a more intimate one. It was taking me apart. Not physically, mentally, softly, silently, piece by piece. And the silence that followed me into the hallway made one thing certain. It was not done yet. I left the station without speaking to anyone else. The hallway felt too narrow. The lights felt dimmer than they should have been. Every reflective surface caught my eye, and every time I looked, I expected to see a delay in my movements again. Even when none appeared, the fear stayed. Outside, the sky had turned a washed-out gray, the kind of morning that never fully wakes up. A thin mist rolled across the parking lot, hugging the asphalt in slow curls. My cruiser sat exactly where I left it, but something about it felt different. The air around it felt warmer, too warm. As if someone had been standing beside it only moments before. I paused, waited, listened. Nothing moved. A part of me wanted to walk away, to call someone, to tell the department I needed time off or help or a transfer. But even as the thought flashed through my mind, a deeper instinct crushed it. The keeper would follow. The highway was not a location. It was a boundary, a threshold, and I had already stepped through it. I entered the cruiser anyway. The seat felt warm again, not from sunlight, not from the engine, from presence. A presence that did not want to fade. I turned the ignition. The car started instantly, too instantly, smoother than usual, as if the engine wanted to cooperate for reasons that had nothing to do with mechanics. I pulled onto the road. The world outside the windows seemed muted, like sound had been stripped away. Cars passed in the distance but made no noise. A dog barked near a fence line, but the sound reached me thin and wrong, like a recording played through a failing speaker. The keeper was adjusting something. Not the world itself. Me. I joined the main highway, following habit more than choice. My hands moved without instruction, guiding the cruiser north as if drawn by a magnet. The radio stayed silent for the first few miles, completely silent, not even a crackle of static. Too quiet. Then the silence broke. Unit 12. I flinched violently, my knuckles whitened on the wheel. The voice was dispatch, but not truly. The tone wavered. The packing felt distorted. The words arrived fractionally late, as if they traveled a longer path than usual. Unit 12. Please confirm your location. I swallowed, forcing my voice steady. Heading north on Highway 3. Static scraped the speaker. We see that. A cold ripple moved across my skin. Dispatch should not have been able to see my location without GPS confirmation, and my unit's tracker had been unreliable for months. Still, The voice continued as if reading from a list. "We have an abandoned vehicle near the southern pass. Occupant missing. Engine warm." My heartbeat spiked. It was repeating the Canyon Road incident. Word for word. Dispatch who logged that call. More static. Then a quiet laugh. Soft. Wrong. Fragile, like someone learning how laughter is supposed to sound. My grip tightened. The voice steadied. "We are sending you coordinates. Stand by." A set of numbers appeared on the dashboard screen. Not from dispatch. Not from any official system. I recognized the coordinates immediately. They pointed to a turnout 2 miles ahead. A turnout where a fatal crash occurred 3 years ago. A crash involving a patrolman. A patrolman who vanished before help arrived. A patrolman rumored to have spoken to someone on the radio minutes before he disappeared. The keeper was choosing the place. It wanted me somewhere specific. My throat dried. My hands shook. The cruiser continued forward like the decision had already been made for me. I whispered to myself, barely audible, "You do not have to stop. You can drive past it. You can turn around. You can." The radio cut me off. "Unit 12. We need you here." The voice now perfectly matched dispatch. Then shifted. Matched Lee. Then shifted again. Matched me. "We need you here." The repetition felt like a hand closing around my spine. I turned off the radio. The device clicked itself back on. I pulled the fuse. It still emitted static. I unplugged the antenna. The speaker still whispered softly, muffled but alive. No words. Just breathing. The keeper was close. The turnout came into view. My stomach dropped. The world around the turnout looked darker than the rest of the highway. Not shadowed. Dimmed. As if light bent around it. I slowed without choosing to. The cruiser drifted toward the shoulder. The tires pressed gravel. I fought the steering wheel, muscles trembling. But the wheel felt guided. Pulled. Not by force, but by familiarity. The keeper had learned my touch. My movements. My hesitation. It was driving with me. The cruiser came to a complete stop. Silence followed. A deep, consuming silence. I stared straight ahead, afraid to look left or right. The turnout lay empty, completely still. Then my phone buzzed. I flinched so hard my hand hit the dashboard. Unknown number. Local area code. The screen flashed again. A second buzz. A message. Just one word. Arrived. I swallowed hard. Another buzz. Another message. Look outside. My lungs locked. The world blurred around the edges. I forced myself to look through the driver window. At first, nothing. Then the fog shifted. A shape emerged. Not fully formed. More like the suggestion of a figure leaning forward, as if pressing through a thin membrane that separated one world from another. The shape tilted its head, and in the faint reflection of the window, I saw myself tilt my head the same way. Perfectly. My heart stopped. Cold spread through my body like ink in water. The keeper was not copying me anymore. It was syncing with me, tethering itself, as if preparing to step inside. I turned away from the window and stared at my shaking hands. The radio whispered 3 soft words, the same words written on the frost. You are ready. I sat frozen in the driver's seat, both hands trembling around the wheel. The turnout felt wrong in ways I had no language for. The sky above me was a single sheet of colorless gray. The air felt dead, Even the cold didn't behave like cold anymore. It clung instead of biting. It pressed instead of chilling. It felt like fingers. The reflection in the window still echoed my movements half a second late. Tilted head, straightened shoulders, trembling breath. Only one of those belonged to me. I pulled my gaze away and stared forward, forcing myself to breathe slow, deep, controlled. I had no weapon against something without form, no rule except the one Lee never said aloud. Do not acknowledge it. But the keeper had already begun acknowledging me. An acknowledgement is a bridge. A soft pressure touched the back of my seat. Not a push. Not a weight. A presence. My entire body locked. A cold filament of fear wrapped around my spine and pulled tight. I did not turn around. I did not dare. My thoughts screamed with instinct. It is behind you. Do not look. My breath stuttered. The pressure grew slightly, like someone leaning forward to speak near my ear. I felt warmth, faint, wrong, inconsistent, spread through the fabric of the seat. Something was shaping itself. Something testing what it felt like to sit where I sat. My radio clicked. Once, twice, then silence. Then my own voice filled the car, calm and steady. Do not be afraid. I clenched my jaw. I did not reply. The voice grew smoother, more confident. I am not here to hurt you. I shut my eyes tight. A whisper formed behind my ear. I am trying to become you. I felt my pulse slam against my ribs. My fingers curled tighter around the steering wheel. I wanted to scream, to shove the door open and run, but instinct kept me anchored. Running meant turning my back. Turning my back meant giving it permission. The warmth behind me spread farther across the seat, like a body pressing gently into the fabric. The faint sound of something shifting, a soft adjustment of weight, reached my ears. Something was sitting with me. Not fully formed, not solid, but present. The radio hissed again. You brought me here. Let me stay. My eyelids fluttered. I wanted to shout, to deny it, to tell it to crawl back into whatever void it came from. But words were openings. Speech was nourishment. Recognition was surrender. I kept my mouth shut, breath shallow, every muscle trembling. The keeper adjusted itself again. I felt it lean slightly forward, and the faintest pressure touched the back of my headrest. My heartbeat thundered against my skin. Then slowly, the passenger seat creaked. I did not look. I could not look. But peripheral vision betrayed me. I saw the shadow. A faint shape moved across the fabric of the passenger seat. Not a full body. Not a face. Just a deepening of the air itself. As if a person-shaped absence had taken form. The shadow tilted its head. My head tilt. The exact same slow angle I had made earlier. It had learned the movement. It had practiced the timing. It had rehearsed the moment. A soft, trembling inhale escaped from it. An imitation. A rehearsal. A test. My throat closed so tightly I could barely breathe. Then the radio spoke again. Not in my voice. Not in any voice. In a hollow approximation of speech, scraped together from memory and static. Let me in. The request hit me like a spike of ice. Behind me, the warm pressure vanished. Instantly. Completely. Not because it left. Because it moved. I felt it shift through the cabin, sliding along the interior in a way no physical body could. My skin prickled. My vision blurred. Every nerve shouted the same thing. It is in the car. It is changing places. It is choosing a shape. I squeezed my eyes shut. When I opened them again, the passenger seat was empty. But the driver's seat, my seat, held a faint indentation beside me. as if something sat halfway inside me, sharing my space, shaping itself to fit. I choked on a breath. My body shook violently. The radio whispered one final time, softer than a sigh, quieter than breathing. Almost. The single word carried a weight that made my stomach twist. Not finished. Not complete. Not yet me. But close. I could feel it now. Not behind me. Not beside me. Inside the edges of my awareness. It knew my breath, my heartbeat, my posture, my movements. It was learning how to sit with me, how to think with me, how to shape itself into what I was. I started the engine with a desperate twist of my wrist. The cruiser roared to life as if startled. I slammed the vehicle into drive and tore away from the turnout. But the fear did not stay behind. It stayed exactly where it wanted to be. Inside the car. Inside the silence. Inside the seat next to mine. Inside me. The patrol lights flickered once, a single silent flash that lit the empty road. The keeper had not just watched. It had entered. And it would not leave until it understood everything it needed to replace. I drove until the world became a blur of gray sky and broken asphalt. I did not choose a direction. My hands moved without thought, gripping the wheel as if it were the last anchor keeping me from dissolving into the thing that rode with me. Every mile felt like a mile stolen from something patient enough to wait in silence. And the silence was changing. It was no longer emptiness. It was presence. A presence that adjusted its weight when I adjusted mine. A presence that breathed out a half second after I did. A presence that settled deeper into the car as the engine hummed beneath us. The keeper no longer needed shadow or fog or stolen cars. It had what it wanted. Access, proximity, a seat beside me. And the more it learned, the more I felt parts of myself slipping. A thought would surface, and half a heartbeat later, I would hear it echoed, not in words, not in sound, but in a subtle shift in the air, as if something inside the cruiser anticipated my thinking before I completed it. The road bent gently to the left. My hands moved. A split second later, the indentation on the passenger seat sank deeper, syncing with my rhythm. Learning the motion. A hollow whisper threaded beneath the engine's vibration. Not a word, not a warning, just the quiet shaping of a new voice trying itself out inside the machinery of silence. I pressed harder on the accelerator, hopping speed would shake it. Nothing changed. My reflection in the rearview mirror flickered again. This time it smiled. I did not. I forced myself to look away. The radio clicked. Unit 12. The voice was mine. Not an imitation this time. Perfect. Enough that if someone else heard it, they would believe I had spoken. Unit 12, report status. The tone was neutral, calm. Professional. Practiced. I froze in place. The microphone sat inches from my hand. If I touched it, I knew something would answer faster than I could. Something that no longer needed to mimic me. Something that could speak as me. I did not respond. The radio clicked again. A longer click. A patient one. Then silence. But the silence felt like a held breath. Ahead of me, the horizon brightened with weak daylight. The sun struggled to break through a sky that looked bruised and heavy. The colors felt muted, washed out, wrong. The world looked like a photograph losing its pigment. I slowed the cruiser and pulled onto the shoulder. The tires crackled against gravel. The indentation in the passenger seat deepened again, as if something leaned forward to see what I would do next. I sat there breathing shallowly. I am losing parts of myself, I thought. Thought it, never said it. but something inside the cruiser shifted as if it heard, as if it understood. No words, no voice, just a subtle tightening of the air. An acknowledgement. I turned off the engine. The silence thickened instantly. The cruiser felt too small, too occupied. The air felt shared. When I opened the door and stepped out, the cold morning hit my skin so sharply it burned. I moved around to the front of the car, desperate for space, for air, for a moment without the shape in the passenger seat. But when I looked back through the windshield, the seat was empty again. Perfectly smooth, perfectly normal, as if it had never held anything. My legs weakened. It had learned how to hide. The wind shifted suddenly, pushing dry grass across the shoulder. The sound was faint, almost swallowed by the wide emptiness of the land. I leaned against the hood, breathing deeply, grounding myself in the cold. But the highway did not feel empty. It felt like a giant lung exhaling beneath the earth, as if the road itself breathed under my feet. A faint vibration crawled up the metal of the cruiser. Not mechanical, not engine-related. Organic. I stepped back in shock. The ground beneath me throbbed in a slow, subtle pulse. A heartbeat. Not mine. I stumbled away from the cruiser and stared at the highway stretching endlessly in both directions. Miles of asphalt. Miles of emptiness. Miles of places the keeper had been watching long before I ever arrived. A truth settled over me like a shadow, pulling itself across my skin. The keeper was not the only thing that fed on silence out here. The highway had its own hunger, and it had been calling my name long before the whisper ever reached my radio. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I hesitated before checking it. A message. No number. No sender. Just 2 words. Shift begins. I looked around. The land remained still. The road waited. A final realization stabbed through me with quiet certainty. I was not escaping this. I was part of it now. The patrol would continue. With me. Or with something wearing my shape. As the morning light dimmed again for no reason at all, I did the only thing that remained. I climbed back into the cruiser. The seat beside me warmed instantly.